Okay, so your GMO greetings once again. Yada say we thank everybody for joining again with us once again for another live broadcast. Medinde Odwirafo Kwesi Radnehmbata Akan. My name is Odwirafo Kwesi Radnehmbata Akan. Odwirafo of Akwamumain, Amaruka, Etifi Mudi Akwamu, nation in North America within Odwiraman, the purified nation, Afurakanu, Afuraitkiatnut, meaning African Black people in the Western Hemisphere. So we want to address the topic. We published an article a few years back, and then we did a couple of courses dealing with this topic, certain aspects of this topic, this notion of the BAITI. And we use the ancient term BAITI, the dual T, Ba, spirit. That is the actual origin of the concept of the so-called twin flame. So all of this misinformation and foolishness about twin flame relationships and people having workshops and books and documentaries produced by the White Star Spring, putting forward false information, nonsensical information about this topic. It's one thing to have all of that out there, but then sometimes our people get caught up in that and they make decisions based on false information. So we wanted to put forward accurate information, and we're going to get into that. We did a couple of courses focused on a certain aspect of this topic in the context of marriage, the marriage of the deities like Ra and Rait and Amen and Amenet and Asar and Aset and Mentu and Tananet and Shu and Tefnut and so forth. So we did a couple of online courses. We'll show you links to that. Here we want to focus on the cosmology and how it applies, specifically to relationships, to clear up misinformation so we can understand, how we approach ancestrally, culturally, spiritually from an Afuraitkiatnut grounded perspective, what a relationship is, what a balanced, complementary relationship actually is. So, and for those who, if you can hear in the background, of course, it is July 4th, so the brainwashed amongst our people are, they go and purchase fireworks typically from Mexicans. Mexicans have set up a little wooden kiosk in a Black neighborhood or on the outskirts of a Black neighborhood, set up a little kiosk. We line up, give them thousands of dollars, and what we get in return is something that's going to explode into nothing. So it's insane, but some of our people are still doing it. So if you hear that in the background, I don't know how loud it is, but that's what's going on. It sounds like a war zone. Depending on what neighborhood you're in, that's what happens around this time. So, all right. So first, let me pull up this. We're going to pull up a couple of things. In fact, as a matter of fact, first let me show you the reason why we utilize this symbolism here. All right. So, in the reason why we utilize this symbolism for the flyer, this is a sculpture, a couple in the Baule Akan community. So Akan people are the plurality of the population of Ivory Coast and West Afuraitkiat, and as well as the majority population in Ghana, West Afuraitkiat, West Africa. So between Ghana and Ivory Coast, there are about 26 million Akan people, one of the largest ethnic groups on the continent in general. Also one of the largest ethnic groups from West and Central and parts of South Afuraitkiat, Africa, from whom our people were taken and forced into the Western Hemisphere. So there are many people in the Western Hemisphere who are Yoruba ancestrally, or Igbo, or Bakongo, or Mindi, or Gola and Kisi. There are many of our people who are Akan. And of course, when you look at our work and our books and the 31 books I've published and classes and so forth, you'll see that we focus a great deal on Akan culture and showing the continuity of culture from ancient Khanid and Kemet into Akan culture in West Afuraitkiatnut, Africa, into the Western Hemisphere, because we are Akan and we know our ancestry. So that's one of the reasons we do that. But it's also, comparatively, you can show the cosmology. And when you learn from one Afuraitkiatnut culture, you learn from them all. So this is from the Baule Akan people. It's a sacred couple, spiritual couple, Bilolo, beyond the spirit, ancestress couple and so forth, complementary balance, sitting on their thrones. And then, of course, we have Shu and Tefnut, male and female divinity of expansion and contraction, who we're going to get into their cosmology, because the story of the twin flames who are together, the couple that's together, then they split apart, and then eventually they find each other again and come back together based on divine wisdom. That story is stolen directly from the cosmology of Shu and Tefnut, because that's what took place with them. That's the origin of the twin flame story. And then, of course, they corrupt that, and they even add some dissexual, homosexual nonsense to it in European culture. So, but they are the cosmological foundation for this notion of twin flame relationships. So we're going to get into that. And in the Medusa, this is one of the spellings of BAITI. So that's the reason we have that representation there. Okay. So first, we're going to look at the term Ba. The term Ba, as it's spelled in the language of ancient Khanid and Kemet. It is the same term in Akan as Bara. That's the term for spirit. The whites and offspring misclassify it as soul, but it's actually spirit. And we've shown in a number of our books the reason why Ba is actually spirit, and Ka, K-A, Ka, is actually the term for soul. We wrote a whole book on the soul, the nature of the soul, the divinity in the head region, the divine consciousness, and so forth. So the Ka is the soul, Ka for males, Ka-et for females. But the spirit, the divine living energy surging through you, that life force energy, that golden solar life force energy that's surging through you, that is the Ba. Ba for males, Ba-et for females. And of course, it's Afurakanu, Afuraitkiatnut, or African Black people only. So the term Ba is the term for spirit. Now, very often represented as this, in the sacred animal totem, this particular bird is a representation in and of itself for Ba. However, sometimes you will see the bird and the little bowl right here of burning incense with a flame arising from the bowl. So you have the term Ba, you're talking about a bird, and then you have a bowl of burning incense. To give you a better picture of that bowl of burning incense, if you see the Per-A, the sovereign, the king, and so forth, so-called pharaoh, he's holding a bowl of burning incense. The flame is arising. You see the smoke here and so forth. That's what's going on right here. You also have the Ba bird right here, the little bowl, and this is a flame arising from the bowl. So when you see in the Medusa, in the hieroglyphs, you have the bird, and then you have the bowl with the burning incense and the flame coming out. That's one representation for Ba, sometimes just the bird itself. You also have the human-headed bird, the head of the human being who that spirit belongs to, the head of the human being on the body of the bird, and then the little bowl of burning incense in front of the person. Now, let me give you a different representation of that. We're going to go to one of the articles we published. to get some more insight on the nature of that symbolism. So on our WordPress blog, we published another number of articles, and this is one of them. Aba Nekabet, breath and spirit, the Ba and Ba'et. Okay, give me 1 second. All right. So we were talking about a number of different things in this article, mainly focused on the female divinity Nekabet, who's called Ayaba, or Aba and Akan, and Ayaba and Vodun, and Oba and Yoruba, and so forth. But this is the Ba spirit for the male, Ba'et spirit for the female, and so forth. So in the context of discussing that, we talked about the Ba, and we get to that portion here. And just to give you a quick image, for example, when someone transitions and you see the spirit of the man here, or the woman and so forth in the ancestral realm, you see the female divinity coming out of the tree and so forth, Nut in the tree, and she's pouring libation and reinvigorating the individual who's transitioned. The Ba spirit that is normally inside of the body of the individual, the Ba spirit, just like breath leaves you, when you transition, the spirit leaves the body and so forth. That spirit flies away from the body, goes to get rejuvenated by the female divinity Nut. She's rejuvenated. The spirit for the woman, her spirit, her Ba'et. For the man, his spirit, his Ba. And once that divine living solar energy is rejuvenated and replenished by the female divinity Nut, then the spirit jumps back in the body. So, and the same thing, when you look at the representation of the great vulture, and we talk about her governing the respiratory system, when you look at the heart and the lung complex, you'll see that the heart is where the breast is, and the lungs are the two wings and so forth that expand and contract. You see Nekabet governing the respiratory system in that context is the great vulture and so forth. So you have a expanding and contracting set of wings, the lungs that expand and contract and so forth, and the heart area is the breast region. That's for the air, but within the air, when you breathe in air, there's also solar fire, solar energy, and that is the solar bird inside of that structure right there. So when you see the Ba bird, you either see it as a human-headed bird, the bird of the head of the person, the body of the bird, and the little bowl, once again, with the flame arising, the burning bowl of incense and so forth. Or sometimes you will see the bird, this is a side view, the bird itself, the head of the person, and the solar disk on the head. So why do they have either a bowl of burning incense or the solar disk and a bird? Because your life force energy, your spirit, is an animate, meaning winged force. It's an animate, winged fire. There's an animate fire surging through your system. Just like when you take in air, inside the air is solar energy, fire energy, and so forth. And as your heart is pumping and sending blood throughout the system and oxygen throughout the system, sending life force energy throughout the system, and it's constantly circulating through your system, that solar energy is constantly surging through you. It's an animate, meaning a winged fire. So you have the bowl of burning incense for the fire, or the solar disk on the head of the birds, showing you have an animate fire within you that animates you, makes you active, vital, functioning, and so forth. That's why the Ba itself is the spirit, the animate force, but then it's also the term for flame. So Ba is spirit, but it's also represented by the flame. Now, So we say the term for spirit, the divine living energy animating us, is Ba for the Afurakanu male, Ba'et for the Afuraitkiatnut female. We just saw that in the Medutu and the hieroglyphs and so forth. The Ba or Ba'et is a spirit force, a child of Ra and Rait, the Creator and Creatress, who are called Inyonkopon and Inyonkonton in Akan, Odumare and Oshumare in Yoruba, Da and Aida Huedo in Vodun. And let's just show an image of that real quick so you can see. This book is one of the 31 books I've published. You can download all 31 of my books for free from my website. But we were shown in this book that this is Ra, the creator of the universe. This is Rait, the creatress of the universe. In the Akan language, they're called Inyonkopon and Inyonkonton. And we're showing the cosmology of these divinities, but also their identity in Akan culture. We also make a reference to show that they're the rainbow serpent and so forth, the solar disk, and the rainbow serpent encircling the sun and so forth. And their symbolism shows that circle with the dot in the middle is taken from the rainbow encircling the sun and so forth. That's the origin of the symbol. And we also show that in the Ewe tradition in Vodun, the rainbow serpents Da and Aida Huedo, the creator and creatress, are Da, which is Ra, and Aida Huedo, which is Rait and so forth. In Yoruba, that is Odumare and Oshumare. In Akan, it's Inyonkopon and Inyonkonton and so forth. So that entire book we show, we basically prove that and show what the cosmology is. So, but the Ba and Ba'et, the spirit, comes from the great spirit. The great spirit is Ra and Rait, the creator and creatress. And a portion of their divine living energy dwells within us. Just like you can you take in a deep breath, a little portion of the solar energy coming from the Oriya of the sun gets inside your body and heats you up and so forth, a little portion of that. Well, a spirit from the great spirit of Ra and Rait, they have children, just like, the ocean, when it evaporates and, moisture goes up in the sky and condensation takes place. And then you have billions of droplets of rain. Those are little children of the great body of the ocean and so forth. The great spirit is Ra and Rait, and they give birth to smaller spirits, smaller Ba and Ba'et spirits, and some of them dwell within Afurakanu, Afuraitkiatnut, or African Black human beings only, as well as plant life, animal life, mineral life, and so forth. So they send one of their children to take up residence within us, and we have a spiritual force within us that we can direct to our arms, legs, extremities, and so forth, so we can act, function, we can enhance that power, expand that power through ritual practice. When people lay hands and heal and so forth and expand that fire force, or even if someone on a mundane level practices martial arts, and the residual energy of that electromagnetic force they can use to break cinder blocks and so forth. That's on the residual mundane side, but we have the spirit force itself. We can expand that energy and so forth. But that's, if you imagine it like the solar energy coming from the sun, a portion of that gets inside our bodies. That's the force that animates us. We have a spirit, a child of Ra and Rait that dwells within us. Now, so we say Ra and Rait direct one of their children as a divine spirit force to take up residence within our spirit bodies. That's the divine living energy that animates us. Now, we're talking about how we absorb the solar energy and heat through the breath. It's carried within the oxygen through the bloodstream and so forth, permeating the entire body. So that's the animating force. Now, give me 1 second. So once again, when you look within your body, the heart and the lung complex is like the breast of the bird and the wings of the bird. When you breathe in and out, that's the expansion and contraction, and the wings are expanding and contracting within your body and so forth. On the outer side, that's the great vulture divinity, Nekabet, which is the respiratory system, but within that air is solar fire. That's the little solar bird sitting within you. So your head is here, the breast of the bird is here, and the wings are here. So you have a little solar bird inside of you, expanding and contracting the whole time. And that's another representation of that. Of course, you see the Black individual with the afro and so forth. And then we start talking about the endocardium, epicardium, and so forth, and its relationship to the shrine of the ba and ba physiologically within your body. But so let's go back to our definitions. In the Medutu, to show the relationship between Shu and Tefnut and the ba and ba. Okay, so we know the ba, the solar bird within us. Ba, it says the soul God, but in reality it's the spirit, the animating force, the spirit. The great ba of creation is Ra. He is the great ba, or the great spirit animating force, just as Rait is the great ba'et, the great animating feminine force. So they say soul God in the pyramid text and so forth, and the soul God is ba and ba'et, but it's really the great spirit now. But then we have BAITI, the two divine, not souls, but spirits. And here the two spirits in the two chafui, and that is the portion we want to talk about. So the E, I, or sometimes, written as Y, when people are translating the language of Kemet and so forth, that represents the dual. So E or T in Kemet, so you have Ba or Bat, that's a spirit. U is the plural, so if you have Ba, that's one spirit. Ba'u, Ba with an U at the end, means spirits. Just like in English, you have S, which is the plural. You have spirit. You have S at the end, spirits. It's more than one spirit. In ancient Kemet, it's the U sound. Sometimes they write it as W, but it's the U sound. Ba is spirit. Ba'u is multiple spirits. But they also have a mechanism to represent the dual, meaning specifically two. And that is T. So Ba is a spirit. Ba'u is multiple spirits. Bai, T are the two T, Ba spirits. So BAITI, you'll see here, dual. Different spellings of that, the two birds and the two individuals. You have two birds here, and the two falcons on the standard are showing that this represents divinity. So multiple spellings of the term BAITI, but the two spirits within the two chafi. Now, here we have Shu and Tefnut. You see Tefnut, T-F-N, Tefnut, and we're going to talk about that. That's the way her name is spelled. And then you have Shu. You have the solar disk. Shu has to do with fire, but Tefnut also has to do with fire, but specifically, when you see the water line pouring out, it's water, but it's the form of a hot or a fiery water. So there's an expansion and contraction. So let's show what we're talking about and who they are, where they come from, and all of that. And then we'll get into the cosmology found in the Runu Pert and Heru about who Shu and Tefnut are as these twin flame spirits specifically. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go to one of our other books. Okay, so this is one of the other books that we've published. We recently went into detail about this on a live a few days ago. Afuraitkiatnut, the origin of the term Africa. We show in the Medutu in the hieroglyphs, actually right on the front cover. Afurakanu right here from the papyrus of Hunefer, as well as Afurakanu from the temple of Paraka, so-called Philae, and ancient Kemet, and so forth. But we go into the cosmology and prove that Afurakanu is the origin of the term Africa. But there's some other information in here that's relevant to this topic. So we were talking about the Ba and the Bayet, spirit, and the soul, the Ka and Kayet. But we were talking about the deity Ptah, the fashioner of creation. He's deep within the core of earth. And he's the divine fashioner. So, deep within the earth's core, Ptah is called the fashioner of the universe. He's called the patron Ntoro, divinity of master craftsmen and craftswomen, architects, builders, sculptors. He's Obuade and Akan and Obalue and Yoruba and Sakpata and Vodun and so forth. But he's the fashioning force deep within the core of earth. The churning of that fiery core is constantly fashioning earth and so forth. The spiritual force in the inner core, on the masculine side is Ptah, on the feminine side is Sekhmet and so forth. They're deep within the core. But so when Ra and Rait create the universe and cause things to come into being, they direct Ptah to fashion the forms of things like planets, suns, moons, stars, and he's deep within the core, constantly fashioning. So he's the master craftsman, architect, and all of that. Now, they talk about Ptah being the first king of earth because the core is being fashioned first and so forth. And then you have this lineage talking about Ptah, the inner core, Heru, the outer core, Atem, the lower mantle, Shu, the upper mantle, Geb, the crust, Asar, black soil substance, and so forth. So when you look in ancient Kemet and you see that the kingship in the cosmology passed from Ptah, and then Atem took over, and then after Atem and Atemet, or Asasi Nebetetepet, gave birth to Shu and Tefnut, and then Shu and Tefnut gave birth to Geb and Nut, and Geb and Nut gave birth to Asar, Aset, Set, and Nebethet, and then Asar and Aset gave birth to Heru. So on the masculine side, when they talk about the kingship, it passed from Ptah to Atem to Shu to Geb and to Asar. When you look at the shrines within earth, you have Ptah at the inner core, you have Atem in the mantle, lower mantle, Shu in the upper mantle, Geb, the crust, Asar, the black soil substance. So every layer, Ptah, inner core, Atem, Shu, Geb, crust, Asar, black soil, and so forth. Every layer, when they say the kingship passed from Ptah to Atem to Shu to Geb to Asar, this is what we're talking about. On the geological side. So Ptah is the inner core, Atem is the lower mantle, Shu is the upper mantle, Geb is the crust, Asar is the black soil substance on above the crust and so forth, on top of the crust. And then Heru is born. So let's look at the image of the Earth's core real quick. So you have the divinities, Ptah, his spirit animates that inner core. You have Heru operating through the outer core, and that includes Heru, Bedeti, and so forth when you're talking about the inner earth. But then in the mantle is broken up between the lower mantle and upper mantle. Atem is the lower mantle. Shu, his son, is the upper mantle. Then Shu gives birth to Geb, that's the crust. And then on top of the crust, you have, hold on one second. Looks like it didn't scroll down. Hold on one second. Let me switch over. Hold on a second. Okay, let me switch screens so you can see this breakdown. Okay. Okay, so this is what we're saying. So the spiritual force that animates the inner core is Ptah. You have Herubedeti in the outer core when you're talking about the internal structure. But then you have Atem in the lower mantle, Atem and Atemet, or Asase Nebet Tepet, male or female force in the lower mantle. Then they give birth in the cosmology to Shu and Tefnut, and they are in the upper mantle here. And then Shu and Tefnut in the upper mantle give birth to Geb and Nut. And Geb is the Earth's crust, and Nut is the atmosphere surrounding the Earth. And then Geb and Nut give birth to Alsar, Set, Set, Nebet, Het, which is the black soil, river waters, red soil, rain waters, and so forth. So the kingship, when they talk about it in the cosmology, it passed from Ptah to Atem to Shu to Geb to Alsar. You're going internally all the way to externally to the king that is on earth, the first king on earth, which is Alsar, the black soil substance, and so forth. And then Set kills Alsar, but then Heru is born of Alset, the virgin, and so forth. He comes into power and then takes back the rulership and so forth. So we're showing cosmologically, geologically, where they come from. So you have Shu and Tefnut in the upper mantle. Now, when you look at the term for Shu, you see the feather, you see the little chick for the U sound, but then you see the solar disk. And you will find in the language of ancient Kemet, as well as Yakan language, the term Shu means expansion, but it also means fire, hot, burning, and so forth. So it's a fiery energy. It's a fiery, expansive energy. You'll also have Tefnut, and Tef means to expectorate or release. And you see the lips and the water line, the wavy water line spilling. So it's a release of water. So that's Tefnut and so forth. And the little vase right here contains water. So it's Tefnut is a release of water, but she's the sister of Shu. So it's a fiery water. Now, that's the cosmology. They're in the mantle and so forth. And that's what we're talking about throughout the cosmology of Kemet. Two fiery divinities. You will see also, for example, you'll see that not only does Shu have the feather on his head, fanning the flames of the fire and so forth, but that's expansion. That fiery energy, you need oxygen for fire to expand and so forth. So, but you see Tefnut, she has the solar fire disk on her head. So when they talk about Shu dealing with fire and Tefnut dealing with water or moisture and so forth, But what they don't understand typically is the kind of water they're talking about is a fiery or hot water. Now, you may be familiar with this notion of hot springs. And let's just pull that up so you can see a representation of that. So we want to pull up okay. So a hot spring, a hydrothermal spring, or geothermal spring is a spring produced by the emergence of geothermally heated groundwater onto the surface of the earth. The groundwater is heated either by shallow bodies of magma, molten rock, or by circulation through faults to hot rock deep within the earth's crust and so forth. And so some people get into hot springs, and they're, certain hot springs have healing effects, but some of them, are so hot that they can burn you and so forth. So water issuing from a hot spring is heated geothermally, that is, with heat produced from the Earth's mantle. Now, this is a very important article that we put forward when we were first teaching on this subject, because it confirmed our ancestral cosmology. We talked about Shu and Tefnut. They are in the mantle and so forth. The mantle is hot and fiery and so forth. But Tefnut, Tef means to release or spit and so forth. And the container Nut is the container of water. So we knew that Tefnut is the fiery one, the divinity with the solar disk. She's the female, fiery water deep within the mantle. So there's a hot source of water in the mantle. That's the cosmology. And we're going to talk about a little bit in a minute about Shu and Tefnut's interaction and how that water plays into cosmology, but also in relationships. But they just discovered this. They did about 10 years ago. New evidence for oceans of water deep in Earth. The following news release, they were talking about researchers from Northwestern University and the University of New Mexico report evidence for potentially oceans worth of water deep beneath the United States. And there's some more. I don't want to go through the entire piece. Scientists have long speculated that water is trapped in a rocky layer of the Earth's mantle, located between the lower mantle and upper mantle. And we said the lower mantle or the upper mantle is Shu and Tefnut. At depths between 250 miles and 410 miles, Jacobson and Schmack are the first to provide direct evidence that there may be water in this area of the mantle known as the transition zone. On a regional scale, the region extends across most of the interior of the United States and so forth. So they first realized that about 10 years ago. And of course, they found oceans worth of water in the mantle. Our cosmology showed that Tefnut is a spiritual force that animates that fiery, hot water deep within the mantle, along with her counterpart Shu, that fiery magma, rock, and energy in the mantle as well. Shu, fire, Shu, expansion, Shu deep within the core. All right. Now, let's look at their cosmology. And we're going to put this Okay, so in the Runu Pert Imiru, so-called Book of the Dead, Book of Coming Forth, by day and so forth, there is information about Shu and Tefnut. So it is a very long chapter. We don't want to get into all of that. So just want to touch on a few things before they, in fact, let me see. There's a lot of cosmology in here, so I don't want to waste too much time getting to parts that are not 100% reflective. All right. Okay, there's a particular section that says, homage to you, lords of right and truth, Ma'at, divine beings who are behind Al-Sar, causing to be annihilated defects, who are in the following of the divinity Hetep Sekus. Grant you me that I may come to you, destroy you all defects which belong to me according to that which you wrought for the 7 beatified beings, those who were among the followers of their master Sepa, made Anpu their place on that day of come therefore there. So what they're saying right there, there's a group of 7 spirits that were directed by the divinity Anpu to operate under the governance of a divinity named Sepa. These 7 beatified beings or 7 spirits govern the spirit body of Al-Sar. Al-Sar is mummified and so forth, and there are 7 beings governing his spirit body. We show later in some of our classes that these 7 spirits that govern the spirit body of Al-Sar are the 7 spirits that govern the 7 Karu, so-called chakras and so forth. And that's already written in the cosmology of ancient Kemet thousands of years before Hinduism and Buddhism and all that other nonsense. So those 7 beatified beings, they go into detail talking about who they are. So we're not going to go into too much detail about them. We've done that in other classes, but that's what they're referencing. Then they ask the question, what then is it? These lords of right and truth, Tuhuti and Astes, Lord of Amentet, the divine beings behind Al-Sar, they list those divine beings. And 1 second, let me go to the next page. The defects are in the following: Hetep Sekus, Sebek are in the waters. Now, Hetep Sekus is the eye of Ra. It's a female divinity. Otherwise said, the flame it is following Al-Sar to burn up the spirits of his enemies. As concerning the defects, all which belong to Al-Sar, the scribe of the divine offerings of all the divinities Ani, Ma'al-Keru, since he went forth from the womb of his mother. So they're talking about basically the deceased person is saying, asking divinity, since I lived in harmony with divine order, remove my defects, my spiritual defects, just like you remove the, defects from the spirit body of Al-Sar when he was killed and then he was mummified and purified and so forth. Since I lived in harmony with divine order like Al-Sar did, allow me to be purified and my defects removed so I can live in the harmony and company of the ancestresses and ancestors in peace in that community when I'm living in the ancestral realm. So they're just talking about that process. Now, then they list those different divinities. And they list those 7 different divinities and they give the names. We don't have to go through all of that. Then it says, as concerning that day that they reference as come then there, the saying to Al-Sar, it is by Ra, come then there. They're talking about Al-Sar and Ra coming together to work together. Decreed, is it for me and Amentet? I am his Ba, as you can see right here, his Ba. They say soul, but his Ba within the 2 Chafi. Then the question is asked, what then is it? Alsar it is, and this is where the cosmology proves our point. Alsar it is when he goes into the region of Jejedu and he finds the spirit, the Ba of Ra there. They embrace one another, they greet one another. When Alsar and Ra find each other in the spirit realm and so forth, and they begin to work together, they embrace one another there. Come into existence, these two spirits within the two Chafi, these two Ba within the two Chafi. What are the two Chafi? As concerning the two Chafi, Heru, it is the avenger of his father. Oh, hold on 1 second. Okay, I have to. It's a little tricky to expand on Google Books. Okay, Heru, the avenger of his father, and Heru Mkinti Maati, otherwise said, his double spirit within the Chafi. The spirit or Ba, this of Ra, the Ba or spirit, this of Alsar, the Ba, this which is within Shu. So the Ba that is within Shu and the Ba spirit which is within means within Tefnut. His double Ba which is within Jejedu. And then they talk about I am the cat that is fighting by the Persea tree and Anu and so forth. So there's a double spirit that they're referencing that is Shu and Tefnut are the dual spirit. The dual spirit within the Chafi. They are the dual Ba or the BAITI within the Chafi. When you see Ba spelled with the bowl of burning incense, so they're the twin spirit, the twin Ba or the twin flame spirit within Chafi. Now, what is the cosmology of Shu and Tefnut about separating and getting back together and so forth? So first and foremost, they're this dual spirit. Cosmologically or geologically, they're deep within the core of Earth. The Ba spirit that's within your lung structure, let's look at that real quick, and then we're going to get into their cosmology. So there's a site we want to show you real quick. So when you have the lungs, there's something called the pleural cavity. Basically, you have your lungs, you have the membrane surrounding the lungs, and then the membrane between the lungs and attached to the rib cage and so forth. So the membrane here that's surrounding the lung themselves, and then another membrane outside of that, and in between those two membranes is a pleural cavity, and there's water in between the two membranes that's surrounding the lungs and so forth. So the pleural cavity is the space that lies between the pleura, the two thin membranes that line and surround the lungs. The pleural cavity contains a small amount of liquid known as pleural fluid, which provides lubrication as the lungs expand and contract during respiration. Then they talk about what, things that can negatively affect the pleural cavity. But the key with regard to that is Shu and Tefnut are within the lungs. We saw that within the neck better. You saw the Ba spirit, the little bird sitting within the lungs, the solar force within the lungs. When the lungs expand and contract, talking about respiration, that solar force is operating within the lungs and so forth. And you have around the lungs, you have the pleura, you have the membrane surrounding the lungs and, attached to the rib cage and so forth. And in between those two membranes is the pleural fluid that lubricates and, allows the lungs to function and so forth. That is the shrine of Shu and Tefnut, the twins, the two lungs, and the pleura or pleurae within the lungs and so forth, and the water within the cavity. That is the water deep within the core of the mantle and so forth, the fiery water within the core, lubricating earth and so forth. In your body, the shrine of Shu and Tefnut, they're seated within the lungs. They are the fiery forces of expansion, Shu, contraction, Tefnut, that fiery energy that allows you to expand and contract and operate deep within the lungs. That's where they are, but that fiery fluid that lubricates the functioning of the lungs. Also, the lungs purify the blood, when it comes through the heart and so forth, the heart-lung complex, that blood is purified, re-oxygenated, so it can, be sent out through the rest of the body, through the circulatory system, and carry nutrients and oxygen to all the cells. When the blood comes back to the right side of the heart, it has to go through the heart-lung complex. The fire purifies the blood, oxygenates the blood, fires it back up, and now you have the fired up, purified blood, and now it's sent back through the left side of the heart and through the circulatory system, carries the nutrients and the fire, oxygen to all the cells in the body by the arteries. Then it gets captured in the veins and comes back to the right side of the heart. It's deoxygenated. The debris is purified or burned away. More oxygen is added to it, and then it's sent through the left side of the heart. But the lungs have to do with purification, fire, expansion, contraction, and so forth. So the physical shrine of Shu and Tefnut is in the lungs, just like the physical shrine on Earth is basically the pleural cavity, that region within the mantle that's full of magma, fire energy, and fiery water. That's the parallel between the two. Now, you need to know that cosmology in order to understand why they talk about Shu and Tefnut in these different stories, in the fashion that they do. And before I show you that, I want to show you this image real quick. You hear the cosmology and story of the quote-unquote distant goddess. This is an image of Tefnut in the form of a lioness and so forth. Solar disc on the head. Her name is here in Tefnut in the temple of Daka and so forth. But the story of the distant goddess where Tefnut separates, and because of a conflict, then she leaves Kemet and goes into the south, into Nubia, and she takes all the water with her. Then the entire country is suffering and so forth. And Ra sends Shu as well as Tahuti to go down and persuade her to come back to Kemet so she can bring the water back and, abundance comes back once again. This is actually Tefnut. That story is not talking about Sekhmet, which a lot of people misunderstand. Now, so first you needed to know why Shu and Tefnut are the dual Chafi and so forth. They're the dual spirit or the dual Ba, the dual flame or twin flame. Cosmologically, where they're seated in earth, where they're seated in your body. And now you can get to the cosmology and have a better understanding of it. So, Tefnut, the daughter of Atem, and Asase Neberetepet. So Atem, Asase Neberetepet, also Atem and Atemet give birth to Shu and Tefnut, twin sister and consort of Shu, mother of Geb and Nut. Usually depicted as a lioness-headed woman or in fully leonine form. In latter case, often back-to-back with Shu in similar leonine form and so forth. When depicted like this, Shu and Tefnut are known as Ruti, the two lions. And there is hold on one second. Let me show you a quick representation of that. We wrote an article showing that Shu, Tefnut, and Sekhmet are actually Shiva, Kali, and Durga. A lot of people were assuming that, Kali is Sekhmet, and they were doing, articles and presentations about Kali being Sekhmet. It's never been true. One of the titles of Shu and Tefnut are the two Shu. Shu T, the dual T Shu. The dual Shu feathers, but also Shu is the word for fire or flame. So Shu T not only means the dual feathers, but also the dual flame or the twin flame. So, and then we show why Shu is actually Shiva. The Ruru Ta or Ruru T are these two lions of what they were talking about, Shu and Tefnut and so forth. And we also show that Shiva is inferred to be Rudra in the Vedas and so forth. And one of the titles of Shu and Tefnut is Ruru Ta, which is Rudra. And we talk about that a little bit there. So, now, the name Tefnut is sometimes linked to a verb tefn, meaning to spit or eject something from the body. We just talked about that release of water and the little vessel that contains the water. And we know on Earth that vessel is the mantle that contains the hot water and so forth. Now, we don't want to go through all of this. We just want to get to a couple of the important parts. The triangular relationship is further developed in the sequel to the Atem cosmogony, the saga of the Eye. This myth, which is only imperfectly understood, concerns the relationship between Atem, who, however, yields his place to Ra in the most developed formulations of myth. Talk about the phoenix of Ra, was that whereby Atem came into being, talking about the Bennu bird. In the abyss and darkness and in gloom, his eye, Arit, projects itself into the world. So, hold on 1 second. In the Bremner-Wren papyrus, Atem states that his eye followed after Shu and Tefnut, who, after having been ejected from his body, were brought up by and rejoiced in Noon, the pre-cosmic abyss, and were hence distant from him. In returning to him, Atem says that Shu and Tefnut brought to me my eye with them. This leads to a new stage in creation, for Atem states that after I had joined together my members Shu and Tefnut, being like parts of his body, I wept over them, and that is how humans came into being from the tears that came forth from my eye and so forth. So, now, the cosmogonic myth in turn expresses itself through a rather different myth also involving Tefnut, which is generally known as the myth of the distant, returning, or wandering goddess. And so this is the origin of the twin flame story. But first you needed to know, first, who are the twins? Shu and Tefnut are twins, cosmological counterparts, born of Atem and Asasi Nebuchadnezzar. So expansion and contraction, the expansive masculine fire and feminine fire and so forth, the fiery force, expansion and contraction within fire and water and so forth. So Shu and Tefnut are the Shu T, the twin T. Shu, as we just saw, they're twin, but Shu also means flame, so they're the twin flames. We saw in the Runu Pert Imheru that they are the twin Ba, or twin flame spirits within the two Chafi, and they are identified as Shu and Tefnut. Now and we also saw that they're in the mantle together, the upper mantle, the fiery magma rock and the fiery water and so forth that develops the ultimate shape of the earth, the crust and so forth. Now we look at their cosmology as these twins. The cosmogonic myth, Tefnut is induced by Shu to return with him to Kemet from a vaguely determined semi-mythical land, distant land called Bogem or Knesset. Knesset is a region of ancient Nubia, Nubit, regarded as lying to the south of Kemet. Now, the return of the fiery and wrathful distant goddess involves her appeasement or purification through ecstatic rites and by immersion in a sacred lake identified symbolically with the Noon. This process of appeasement, purification of the returning goddess takes place paradigmatically at Abaton on the island of Bige, the site of the tomb of Alsar. Although only imperfectly understood, it is clear that the myth of the distant goddess unites cosmogonic and Alsarian themes. Now, they start talking about when there are different castes of deities, but that's when the thing becomes corrupt and so forth, and Europeans start getting involved, and the Greeks and Romans get involved and so forth. They start switching, the places of the goddesses and so forth. But Shu and Tefnut are, in the true sense, the most primordial and paradigmatic couple. It is alluded to in many temple inscriptions, but not preserved in any early narrative form. Attempts have been made to reconstruct it with the help of a demotic narrative. But hold on 1 second. Let me just get to the other portion of it. Hold on 1 second. So the arrival of the distant goddess is seemingly conceived in two ways. First is Ra's daughter coming to his defense against the enemies and the enemies of the cosmic order he represents. And the second is the theogamy or divine marriage of Shu and Tefnut. This being understood not as that which produced Geb and Nut at the beginning of the world, but rather as the reunion of Shu and Tefnut and an indwelling of each in the other, which also in its most theologically complex form entails the reunion of Geb and Nut with Shu and Tefnut. Now, let me find... Let me show you this image right here once again, so we can have a better understanding. Okay, so in the story, there's the story about Tefnut being dissatisfied with the state of the affairs of the nation. She leaves Kemet. She goes to the south. As she's leaving, as this spiritual force is leaving Kemet and so forth, all the water is being taken out of Kemet, and she's taking it with her, magnetically drawing it all to the south. And now the people are suffering. There's no water at the proper levels and so forth. Ra assesses the situation, and he sends her husband, brother, quote unquote, divine complement, Shu, to go and retrieve her. But he also sends Tahuti, the male divinity of divine wisdom, not sending them to go and, capture her and force her to come back, but through wisdom and through persuasion and showing this is what will be in harmony with divine order, they convince her to return to Kemet. And as she returns to Kemet and moves through the different cities and so forth, water returns to each region that she comes to, and there's rejoicing and, celebration and jubilation and so forth by the people, because things are being returned to order. So when there's a tumultuousness going on in relationships, and then there's a separation, and water or moisture or lubrication or sweetness and so forth leaves the relationship, then you're sent by the creator of the universe to reconnect or reestablish that bond. But you do so under the guidance of the divinity of divine wisdom, which is Tahuti. And that's that story of the separation of the two twins, literally the Shu T, the twin T, Shu are the twin flames. They separate, then they come back together, and then there's harmony in the nation, and then there's separation and so forth. Even physiologically, if you consume the wrong foods or you engage in activity where there's depression and anxiety and so forth, when you look at the spiritually, when you're talking about the lungs, you often hear people talk about that the lungs hold on to grief and so forth. So if you're engaged in grief or depression or sadness and so forth, then that puts a heavy, you have a quote unquote heavy heart and, breathing heavy and so forth, that's captured in the spiritual force that governs the lungs. You have Shu and Tefnut, and there's, some discordance. You're out of harmony with those forces in nature that govern the lungs and so forth. So instead of feeding the heart, the lung complex sends that fire energy. When you breathe in the solar energy, that fire energy goes into the lungs. When the blood comes through the heart that's deoxygenated, that fire you just breathe in purifies the blood, gets rid of the debris, burns up the debris, reoxygenates the blood, fires it back up, makes it more vital. And once it's fired back up, then it's, as we said before, it's sent through the left side of the heart into the arteries, into the circulatory system to start the process over again. So, so you need that Shu and Tefnut operating within the lungs to keep the heart purified, to keep the heart clean, to keep the heart oxygenated and the blood oxygenated. If Shu and Tefnut, if you're out of harmony with Shu and Tefnut, then they're not going to purify the heart and the blood moving through the heart and so forth. Then there's going to be a heaviness and quote unquote anxiety, depression, and all of that, and you're going to have a problem. So you invoke the divinity Shu and Tefnut. They expand your fire force, your expansive and contractive force. You burn away impurities. You lift that depression. You lift that anxiety. Even on a physical level, when you start, if you're depressed and you're not moving and you're sedentary and you're laying around and so forth, and then you say, I need to get my body moving, and you get up and do some aerobic exercise and you start running and expanding and contracting your lungs and filling yourself up with fiery energy, you start vitalizing yourself and, breaking through that depression and so forth, secreting hormones and start to break through that depression. It's the same thing with that spiritual force of Shu and Tefnut, expansive and contractive fire and water within you. You have to purify the heart. It purifies the heart, purifies the blood, the energy moving through the heart. If you're out of harmony with Shu and Tefnut, there's not going to be any heart purification. There's not going to be any heart energy purification. Let's look at this. What's important about the heart in this article, because it's directly related to this notion of balanced relationships. And then we can take some questions on this subject. So we say the physical shrine of the Ba'ath, the spirit. Within the heart is the endocardium, the inner membrane, while the physical shrine of the heart aspect of the heart-lung complex governed by Abba is the epicardium, but the endocardium is where the Ba resides and so forth. The Ba and the Ba'ath reside. Hold on a second. Now, when you see the balancing of the heart against the feather, the weighing of the heart ceremony in ancient Kemet, if the heart is as light as a feather, then it will balance the feather out, and then you passed that particular test. Let's show an image of the balancing of the heart against the feather real quick. We have this in one of our books, just the image of that. Okay, so you see here the heart is on the pan of the scale, and then the feather of Ma'at is on the pan and so forth. So not just after death to see, if you lived in harmony with divine order throughout the course of your life, but also every time you are about to make a decision in life. Your heart is placed on the pan against the feather on the other pan. Of course, the feather is very light. So if your heart is light, it balances the feather, and then you pass that test, and then you can move on and be accepted by the deities and ancestral spirits and live in a pristine community in harmony with order and so forth. The only way your heart can be light is if it's not weighed down by, anxiety, stress, fear, criminality, and so forth. So, but if it's weighed down, then it tips the scales. Now, okay, we went out for a second. Let me know in the chat room if you can hear me once again. It went out for a second. Okay, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. The link went out. Okay, miras. Okay, I just want to go back to that point and then we can answer some of these questions. But so when we talk about the physical heart receiving, the blood and so forth, and the deoxygenated blood and some of the debris and so forth, and then it's purified by the heart-lung complex. The spiritual heart, the ab, as it's called in ancient Kemet, Ebaz is called in Akan and so forth. The spiritual heart receives the energic projections that you receive from other individuals that you come in contact with, also your own conditionings and so forth. But when you come in contact with individuals, when you interface with people, that energic force, when you engage them spiritually, the energic expressions that are bombarded from them that hit you and you receive their energic projections, those are stored in the heart. The heart is a repository for those energic projections and so forth. You can purify those experiences of that energic force, get rid of the things you don't need and save the things that you do. But if you hold on to everything that you receive from other individuals, then your heart becomes heavy. And when your spiritual heart is placed on the scale, it tips and so forth. But when your heart is light, then you can pass that test and you're not weighed down and so forth. One of the ways your heart gets weighed down is there's no purification. But when you invoke Shu and Tefnut, these fiery forces that operate within the physical and spiritual lungs, the Hati is the spiritual heart-lung complex. Just like you have a physical heart, you have a spiritual heart, which is Ab. You have a physical heart-lung complex, and the spiritual heart-lung complex in ancient Kemet is called the Hati. So that spiritual force operant within the heart-lung complex is Shu and Tefnut. When that energy purifies your heart, then your heart is light. You get rid of negative conditionings, as well as the projections that other individuals deliberately project upon you. Emotional energy is, or unconsciously project on you, but you pick them up and retain it. You can purify that, sift that out, separate it, hold on to what you need to hold on to and reject what you need to reject and so forth. Your heart is light and then you can move forward. If you don't do that, then you're walking around heavy. And as they talk about spiritually, you're holding on to grief, anxiety, fear, and so forth. In the lungs, they become heavy. You're not invoking Shu and Tefnut. We pour libation, we invoke Shu, we invoke Tefnut. When we engage in ritual prayer, we invoke Shu and Tefnut and so forth. Part of that reason is so when we need to align with them, we're so close to them already because we invoke them on a regular basis, that calling that energy is relatively easy or simple for us. And when we need to purify ourselves, when we run into relationship issues, or even just there's a disconnection, you need to reconnect with the individual you need to reconnect with, whether they're in your region or another part of the country, another part of the world, and so forth. When you're invoking Shu and Tefnut for that purpose, you start stimulating the forces that will pull that balanced twin flame relationship together. All right. Okay, so that's information we wanted to share with regard to the nature of this twin flame cosmology. Let me show you this so you can be aware of it. On our institution page, we've taught 40 online courses. Some of them were 6-week courses. Some of them was 4-week courses. Some were 7-week courses. They're all archived, so you can access them at a discounted rate. And this is a collage of all the flyers. But when you scroll down on the page, you will see, the original flyers for each one of the courses. And two of them, we did a part 1 and a part 2, 6-week course for each one. Just want to find that flyer real quick. Okay. So, BAITI Seneb, Cosmology of Divine Twin Flame Marriage, Part 1. That was a 6-week course. And you see Shu and Tefnut right here, but you also see Amen and Amenet, Ra and Rait, Ra and Rait. We also have Ptah and Sekhmet, and Mentu and Tananet and so forth. So we were talking about that. And then we had a part 2. And we had Geb and Nut, Asar and Aset, Hapi and Merit, male and female divinities of the Nile River, Set and Nebet Het, Min and Het Heru, and this is Mentu and Tananet and so forth. So hold on 1 second. Here we had Atem and Asase Nebet Tepet. But in those 2 courses, both of them were 6-week courses. We talk about that divine twin flame union piece from the context of the marriages of the divinities. And when you look at the marriages of the divinities and the way they interact with one another in the cosmology, then you see the model for how we need to interact with one another. So when you look at the relationship of Asar and Aset and how they work together cosmologically, Ra and Rait, Amen and Amenet, Shu and Tefnut, Geb and Nut, Asar and Aset, Set and Nebet Het, all of these different ones. You'll see the various elements of how we interact as couples and so forth. So we talk about their marriages of the divinities as a model for balanced complementary relationships and all of their facets. So that's what we're talking about in those 2 courses. Both of those were 6-week courses. They are archived. So the 6-week courses are $15 each. So when you go on the site, you can access the first 6-week course for $15. You can go through that, and you can get the other one for $15 if you like. So when you see all of our 40 courses, the 4-week courses are $10. The 6-week courses are $15. The 7-week courses are, I think, $22 or whatever. So, we have those different ones. But we were dealing with the marriages themselves. That was the specific focus there. But tonight we just want to identify, number 1, who are the twin flames? What is the nature of the twin flame? How is that defined? Why are Shu and Tefnut literally the twin Shu or flames of fire? Where they're seated on earth, where they're seated in the body, in the pleural cavity, and the pleura of the lungs and so forth, where they are spiritually in the Hati. And when we engage in ritual, whether it's certain kinds of ritual for ritual movement, ritual dance, ritual body movement and so forth, anything that's expanding and contracting the lungs, and we invoke Shu and Tefnut in that context, that helps us realign with them and so forth. But invoking them by name, pouring libation, or in meditation, or in ritual chant or ritual prayer, you start bringing that energy closer to you. So when you need to figure out how to realign with your complement, or connect with your complement for the very first time, or reconnect with your complement to be identify who the complement is, and also identify when you're making up things in your head, pretending like this is spiritual and this is my divine complement and so forth, and it's really not. But you're pretending like you got these spiritual downloads and this person is the real person and the spirits told me. When you're engaged in real ancestral ritual, you can separate out when you're making up things in your head and trying to rationalize it spiritually as opposed to really aligning with who's who. So, invocation of the forces in creation that actually govern the union of balanced relationships, Shu and Tefnut, that leads you to that proper awareness. Now, all right. Okay, question, does everyone have a twin flame complementary opposite, meaning that there is someone out there for everyone, someone who matches and complements? We do have that. However, because of the condition that we find ourselves in, sometimes things take place. So, for example, you can, if somebody, you incarnated in a certain region, and then somebody, who's your twin flame incarnated in the same region or not far, and at some point you were drawn together, everything is going fine, but it also depends on what the individual does. In a normal situation, if we were living in our own culture, on our own land, speaking our own language, and everybody practices the same culture, if we're living in our own Akan village and so forth, you'll be able to identify who the individual is. When you come in contact with them, or your Nsamafo pushes you to go to this particular store, this particular place at this particular time, and you cross paths with the person because they push that person to go into the same place, they're going to make sure that you cross paths. They'll alert you to the fact that this is the individual and so forth, and you get multiple confirmations, even through divination. And when you're living your culture, everything will work out in that fashion. Same thing can happen here. You can be pushed to, apply for a job in a different city, and then you move and you're pushed to go to a specific coffee shop on a specific day where you normally don't go. And they're also pushing the person that's going to be your complement to do the same thing. So you cross paths, and it turns out that's the individual. But, if we start following white culture, and if somebody decides they're going to start doing crack cocaine and just throw their life away, they made that decision. You can't, you can try to influence someone to do something correctly, but as an adult, they have to make their own decisions and, work out their own divine function, their own, life focus. So they could go in that direction, make those mistakes because they're following white culture, and it leads them away from their divine complement, and they can die doing that, or they can get involved in selling drugs and go to jail for 30 years and so forth, or they can be brainwashed and say, I only want to, date somebody who's outside of my race because they're brainwashed with white culture and so forth, and they marry somebody else and have children, and they're with them for the next 20 years, or they follow the foolish methodologies of this culture and say, well, I don't want to wait around for the person I need to be with, so the first person who seems just okay, I'm going to get with this person because I don't know when I'm going to meet somebody, and they, get with the person they know they shouldn't be with, and they get married and they have children, and 15 years later, you come across this individual and, they're like, well, I'm stuck here. And they just resign themselves to their fate because they're still operating based on white culture. There are a number of different things that can happen because we live in this culture that separates us from the person that we would normally be with, or they separate themselves, or we separate ourselves, and they end up, going in a totally different direction for, permanently. Sometimes people transition, as we said, get, hooked on drugs, a number of different things that can happen that pull us away from the individual. So that individual is either gone or permanently separated. But then you have other individuals who they were looking for their complement, and their complement was separated as well. So then you end up connecting with somebody in the same situation as you, who practices the same culture. They may not be the person you incarnated to be with, but you all have a balanced complementary relationship. You have a balanced friendship and so forth. And that person is a balanced match. It's no different than if someone found their complement and the complement, got involved in drug use and then they overdosed and died. and then the same thing happened to somebody else, and their complement overdosed and died in another city. And then you all moved to the same city and you came across somebody who was in the same situation as you, practiced the same culture, it's an attraction, balanced friendship, then you end up connecting with that individual, and you can have a balanced marriage and, relationship with them as well. So just because cosmologically, yes, people have someone who they incarnate to connect with, it doesn't always work out that way primarily based on the fact that we live in this culture and our people are pulled away from our ancestral culture. Now, part of the saving grace, so to speak, of ancestral culture is when one person starts to practice, get back in harmony with reality. It's like a tuning fork starting to oscillate and you put another tuning fork near it and it vibrates at the same rate. As soon as you start purifying yourself and getting back to normal and realigning yourself with your Nsamafo, your ancestresses and ancestors, and the Abosom, the divinities that govern you and so forth, then somewhere, wherever your person is, they start feeling that strong, draw and vibration to begin to do the same thing, because you all are connected spiritually. So once you start vibrating at a proper rate and function and frequency and so forth, they start feeling this strong urge to recalibrate themselves. Now, depending on how conditioned they are, they may follow that or they may not. You may come in contact with them, it just depends. But at some point, you would have to make a determination if that person is moving in the right direction or not. And then they have the same thing with yourself. It's not just, it's not just the other person. Everybody has to be on this path of purification. All right. Yeah, so that answers that second question that you had about the institutions. The institutions is the culture in place. One of the reasons we put culture in place is for this reason. One of the main problems that we have in our community is the dissolution of, relationships, or, people getting involved in relationships that are self-destructive, and it creates all kinds of toxicity. And then they have children with people they shouldn't have children with, and creates all kinds of toxicity. If you can imagine, if every Black person in our community was involved with the person they really needed to be with, imagine all the drama that would not exist and how many balanced families we would have and institutions and businesses and so forth. So one of the reasons we establish culture is to build relationships, which leads to building families and bringing ancestresses and ancestors back through these families and clans and so forth, to build a strong Oman or nation. The strength of an Oman or nation is rooted in the strong relationships that people have that lead to strong families and so forth. Okay. That Pert Imeru, so-called Book of the Dead, that's the Papyrus of Ani. So if you just look at Papyrus of Ani, you'll see that. You'll see a number of, even if you go on Google Books, quote unquote Egyptian Book of the Dead, Papyrus of Ani, you'll see that. Yes, so this notion of things that manifest spiritually can also concretize physically. So yes, if someone is spiritually having a heavy heart, that discordant energy can be concretized if it's, perpetuated to the point where people have, heart issues, stress, high blood pressure, abnormal hormonal secretions out of cycle and so forth, heart disease, heart attacks, various things, because it starts with the belief, a false belief, which can lead to a physical malady. If someone is, deathly afraid of snakes, and someone plays a trick on them and has a little rubber snake on the floor with a string, and the person comes into the room and turns on the light and they're checking their mail or something, and the person pulls the string and it looks like a snake is moving across the floor, they could scream and their heart starts racing, and they could even faint or even have a heart attack and so forth. The little piece of rubber had nothing to do with their adrenaline, had nothing to do with their adrenal glands releasing adrenaline, had nothing to do with their heart rate, had nothing to do with their nervous system, had nothing to do with their circulatory system, but a false belief. And also the false belief about how you should respond to a false belief could lead to a physiological response of someone fainting or even having a heart attack or even dying based on a false belief. It starts off with something non-physical and can manifest physically. And it's no different when people see things or they experience things and they think about things and they're triggered, then they secrete hormones out of cycle and it causes problems physiologically, creates stress and so forth. But that's why we have ritual practices to overcome these things. That's why we have SUSUW, meditation and so forth. And in fact, let me put that up on screen for those who are not on the most recent lives on our page here, on the SUSUW page on our website. We have our upcoming, which is starting next Wednesday, by the way, our SUSUW Meditation Instructor Certification. So if you would like to be certified as an instructor in meditation, so you can utilize that certification. It's a 4-week course. At the end of the 4 weeks, you get your certification. You can take that credential and engage in entrepreneurial activity. You can teach meditation sessions at a school, after school programs, places of employment, women's shelters, cultural organizations. When people say we want to have somebody come out and do a meditation session for 20 minutes, as we say, some people pay $100, $200, $300 for you to conduct a 30-minute session. It could be with adults. It could be group therapy sessions. People have communal organizations where they want people to come out and, assist people. They're teaching women how to get back on track. If they were in a homeless shelter or women's shelter for, domestic violence and so forth, or after school programs for children, or in school programs, or, summer school programs, rites of passage programs for adults in places of employment when they want to enhance productivity and they have a seminar and they bring someone out to, do meditation once a month or once a week or just a one-time event. They pay you a few $100s to conduct the meditation session and so forth. But you can use your credential for economic, entrepreneurship, but you're also impacting the community at the same time. So we have that. That is starting Wednesday. We still have a few spots open for registration. So if you'd like to register for the SUSUW Meditation Instructor Certification, you can do so on our SUSUW page on our website. Also on that page, we did a recent live, and you'll see this on our page. We're offering the referral fee for if you refer the course to someone and they register and they let us know, or you let us know that they were referred by you. Then once they register and pay the registration fee, then we will send you a $100 referral fee. So once they pay the registration, a part of that payment will be sent to you as a referral fee for, reaching out to people that we didn't have access to. And, your Cash App, you PayPal, you whatever. So if you refer one person, you get $100. If you refer 5 people, you receive $500. So that's a way for us to connect with the community through people who we normally would not be able to reach or wouldn't even know existed and so forth. And at the same time, we're empowering the community. So that's on our SUSUW page. All right, so I want to make sure I didn't miss anything before we end it. If nobody else has any questions. All right. Okay, so once again, Yedase, we thank everybody for joining in with us. And Yebe Shabio, we will meet again.